Strength is not always a roar, not always the bared fang and the bristling fur. Sometimes it is the quiet resolve to endure the storm, the silent refusal to break when the world insists you are already broken. It is the hushed lullaby sung to the life within when every other voice is a curse. It is the stubborn beat of a heart that has been told it is worthless, yet continues to pump blood, to sustain, to hope. For Ilara, strength had become the splintered wood of her cabin door, holding back the wind. It was the thin broth she sipped, tasting more of determination than of nourishment. It was the weight of the child nestled beneath her ribs, a secret miracle the world had condemned as a flaw. Her world had shrunk to this forgotten patch of earth at the edge of the Blackwood Pack's territory, a place where the trees grew thick and gnarled, choking the sunlight. The Pack lands, vibrant with the life and warmth of the community she once belonged to, felt a lifetime away, though she could still hear the distant howl of the evening hunt if the wind was right. It was a sound that no longer called to her. It was a reminder of everything she had lost. The rejection had been a spectacle, as public and brutal as a culling. Kyle, her mate, had stood before the entire pack, before the Alpha and the Elders, on the night of the full moon. His voice, a voice that had once whispered promises in her ear, had boomed with righteous fury. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at her swollen belly. "This is a blight," he had declared, his handsome face twisted into a mask of disgust. "The seers have warned of it. A weakness in our line. A pup born under a shadowed moon, destined to be frail, to bring ruin. I will not have my legacy tainted by such an omen. I reject this vessel. I reject this curse." The words had struck her with physical force, stealing the air from her lungs. Vessel. Curse. He had not even called her by her name. She had become an object of his shame. The pack had murmured in agreement, their fear of the unknown, of a bad omen, far stronger than any loyalty they might have felt for her. The Alpha, a man ruled by tradition and superstition, had nodded grimly and sealed her fate. She was cast out, not banished entirely, but relegated to this crumbling shack, to be forgotten. A ghost haunting the edges of their prosperity. Kale had been her everything. He was a beta warrior, destined for greatness, his strength and ambition a burning sun that had once warmed her. She had believed in his vision, in the powerful family they would build, but his ambition was a ravenous thing, with no room for perceived imperfections. His love had been conditional, a transaction, and she had failed to hold up her end of the bargain. Now her only companion was the rhythmic kick from within her womb, a tiny, insistent pulse that defied Kale's prophecy. "I am here," it seemed to say. "I am alive." She would press a hand to her stomach, her own resolve hardening with each movement. He was wrong. They were all wrong. This child was not a weakness. This child was a fighter. It had to be. Its survival, and hers, depended on it. If you're captivated by Ilara's fight for her pup's future, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a moment of this epic journey. The nights were the hardest. The cold seeped through the cracks in the walls, a damp chill that settled deep in her bones. Loneliness was a physical ache, a hollow space beside her on the thin straw mattress. She would lie awake, listening to the skittering of unseen creatures in the thatch overhead, her thoughts a swirling vortex of fear and defiance. The fear was a cold, creeping thing. Fear for the birth, for how she would manage alone. Fear for the child's first winter. Fear that Kale was right, that her body had betrayed them both and created something less. But then the defiance would rise, a hot, fierce wave. It was the primal instinct of a mother, a force more powerful than any alpha's decree or mate's rejection. She would protect this child with her last breath. She would be its warmth, its shield, its world. even if their world was only this one small, drafty room. One evening, as twilight bled purple and gray across the sky, a profound stillness fell over the forest. The usual chorus of insects and rustling leaves went silent. A primal part of her, the wolf that lay dormant but not dead, recognized the silence not as peace, but as presence. Something powerful was near. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the taut skin of her belly. She moved to the single grimy window, peering into the deepening gloom. At first, she saw nothing but the familiar silhouettes of the ancient oaks. Then, a flicker of movement. 2 points of light, burning with the intensity of molten gold, regarded her from the edge of the clearing. They were eyes, and they belonged to a wolf. But it was unlike any wolf she had ever seen. It was immense, a creature of myth, its form a living piece of the night. Its pelt was not black, but the deep, starless void of a moonless sky, a shifting tapestry of shadow and substance. It stood half again as tall as the largest warriors in her pack, its sheer presence a weight on the very air. Fear was a knot in her throat, but it was mingled with something else. Awe. The creature did not snarl or advance. It simply watched, its golden gaze seeming to pierce the thin walls of her cabin, to see the very soul of her. It saw her fear, her loneliness, her fierce, desperate love for her unborn pup. She felt seen, not as a blight, not as a vessel, but as she was, a lone she-wolf protecting her own. The moment stretched, timeless. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the great wolf dipped its head in a gesture that felt strangely like a bow and melted back into the forest, leaving behind only the echoing silence and the lingering image of those burning golden eyes. Alara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her hand pressed protectively over her child. She did not know what she had just witnessed, but for the first time in months, a sliver of something other than despair lodged itself in her heart. She was not entirely alone in the woods. The mysterious wolf changed everything. But what did it mean for Ilara and her pup? Let me know in the comments what you think this powerful creature wants. The days that followed were a subtle shift, a slow thaw. She still lived in the margins, still toiled to gather enough to eat. But something had changed. The forest no longer felt entirely hostile. She began to notice things. A rabbit, already killed, left at the threshold of her door. A large pile of firewood, split and stacked neatly, appearing overnight. The marks of a massive paw print in the soft earth near her water source. A silent assurance of protection. She did not see the great wolf again. Not directly, but she felt its presence. It was a guardian, a watcher in the shadows. And with each small kindness, the impossible hope in her heart grew. Her pup was not unwanted, not by everyone. The universe, or something within it, had deemed her child worthy. The labor came with the first snow. A brutal, early winter storm swept through the forest, howling like a banshee. The contractions began in the depths of the night, tearing through her with relentless force. She was alone, as she had known she would be. There would be no midwife, no comforting hand, no soothing voice. There was only her, the storm, and the overwhelming power of the life insisting on being born. It was agony, a visceral, consuming pain that eclipsed everything else. She braced herself against the wall, her breath ragged, her body slick with sweat despite the freezing air. She bit down on a leather strap to muffle her cries, not from shame, but from fear. If the pack heard her screaming, they might come. Not to help, but to ensure the prophecy was fulfilled, to ensure the weak pup did not survive. Hours blurred together, a relentless cycle of agony and respite. Her vision swam, her strength waning. She thought she might die. She thought the pup might die. In her delirium, she whispered prayers to the moon, to the old gods of the forest, to the mysterious wolf with the golden eyes. "Please," she gasped, "let her live. Let her be strong." And then, just as the dawn light began to seep through the cracks in the walls, painting the snow-covered world in hues of pale gold, the pain reached a crescendo, and with a final guttural push, her daughter entered the world. The silence that followed was deafening. She lay there, trembling, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, a sound. A tiny, reedy cry, a protest against the cold and the harshness of the world. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. With shaking hands, Alara reached for the small, damp bundle, pulling it to her chest. Her daughter. She was small, heartbreakingly so, but her cry was not weak. It was defiant. Her tiny fists waved in the air, her legs kicked with surprising strength. Ilara cleaned her, wrapped her in the thin, worn blankets she had, and held her close. She was pale, with a tuft of silver-white hair, so unlike the dark fur of the Blackwood Pack. Her eyes, when they finally opened, were not the usual hazy blue of newborns, but a startling, luminous silver. She was different. But she was alive. She was perfect. "Lyra," Ilara whispered, naming her after the constellation that had shone so brightly the night of her rejection, a symbol of guidance in the darkness. "My brave little Lyra." For 3 days, Ilara hovered between the world of the living and the edge of exhaustion. Fever gripped her, a consequence of the difficult birth and the unforgiving cold. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her only anchor the small, warm weight of Lyra against her chest. The pup nursed weakly, her cries thin but persistent. Ilara knew that if the fever did not break, they would both perish. On the 3rd night, as the storm finally began to abate, Ilara woke to find a presence in her cabin. Not the great wolf, but a woman. She was cloaked in furs, her face shadowed by a deep hood. She moved with a silent grace, tending the dying fire, bringing water to Ilara's lips. Ilara was too weak to question, too weary to fear. The woman examined Lyra with gentle, practiced hands, her touch warm despite the cold. She spoke not a word, but her actions were clear. She was helping them. She left a basket beside the bed, dried meat, herbal poultices, a thick, warm blanket. Then, as silently as she had come, she was gone. But the fever broke. Lyra's cries grew stronger. They survived. Ilara never saw the woman again, but she knew, in the marrow of her bones, that this too was a gift from her unseen protector. The wolf was not just watching. He was ensuring their survival. What happens next will leave you speechless. Keep watching, because the Alpha King's entrance changes everything. Winter deepened, and Ilara carved out a meager existence. She lived for Lyra, every action, every breath, dedicated to keeping the small flame of her daughter's life burning. Lyra was not weak. She was small, yes, but she was tenacious. She grew, slowly but surely, her silver eyes bright with an intelligence that seemed far beyond her months. She did not shift, not like other pups of the pack would by her age, and Ilara worried. Perhaps the prophecy was partly true. Perhaps she was different. But different did not mean weak. Ilara saw the strength in the way Lyra's tiny hands gripped her finger, in the determined set of her jaw when she was hungry, in the way she would stare at the moon with an unwavering focus. One evening, as spring began to hint at its arrival with the first green shoots pushing through the thawing earth, a commotion reached Ilara's isolated cabin. The sound of hooves, many of them, and the shouts of warriors. Fear clenched her heart. Had they come for Lyra? Had Kale decided to finish what he started? She clutched her daughter to her chest, her mind racing through impossible escape plans. But the contingent that arrived at her clearing did not wear the rough furs and bone ornaments of the Blackwood Pack. They were clad in dark polished leather and steel, their armor bearing the sigil of a snarling wolf, crowned and powerful. These were not her pack's warriors. These were the king's guard. At their head rode a figure that commanded instant attention. He was tall, impossibly so, even seated upon the massive black destrier that seemed to be carved from the night itself. His cloak was a deep, midnight blue, edged with silver, and when he dismounted, the movement was fluid, predatory grace. He removed his helm, and Alara's breath caught in her throat. His face was striking, all sharp angles and strong lines, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were a burning molten gold, the same gold she had seen watching her from the forest all those months ago. It was him, the wolf, the protector. He was not just a wolf. He was the Alpha King, Theron. His gaze found her immediately, cutting through the crowd of his own warriors, through the trees, and directly to where she stood, frozen, in the doorway of her pitiful shack. In his eyes she saw 1,000 things: recognition, a deep, ancient sorrow, a fierce, burning determination, and something else. Something that made her heart stutter and race. Want. He walked towards her, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. His warriors held back, their faces a mix of awe and confusion. He stopped a few paces away, close enough that she could see the gold flecks dancing in his eyes, the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his nostrils flared as he took in her scent. "Alara," he said, and his voice was a deep rumble like distant thunder, yet it held a tenderness that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. How did he know her name? "You don't know me," she managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. "But I know you," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I have watched over you. You and your pup." He looked down at Lyra, cradled in Alara's arms, and his expression softened into something that could only be described as reverence. "She is magnificent." "She is different," Alara said, her voice defensive, protective. "They say she is weak." Theron's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. "They are fools," he said, his voice hard as granite. "I have lived for centuries, Alara. I have seen empires rise and fall. I know strength when I see it. And your daughter." He reached out a hand, slowly, giving Alara time to pull away if she wished. She didn't. He gently touched Lyra's soft silver hair. "Your daughter is destined for greatness. She carries a power within her that your old pack could never understand. She is not weak. She is extraordinary." He looked back up at Alara, and she saw the truth burning in his ancient golden eyes. He believed it. He truly believed it. "And you," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate despite the watching warriors. "You, who have endured so much, who have protected her with nothing but your own will and courage, you are a force of nature. You are a queen." A queen. The word was absurd. She was a cast-off, a forgotten relic. She opened her mouth to protest, to laugh bitterly, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He was not mocking her. He was stating a fact. "I have come," Theron said, his voice regaining its formal, commanding tone, though his eyes remained only on her, "with a proposition. I am the Alpha King. I rule the Northern Territories, a realm far greater and far older than any pack you have known. I have no mate. I have no heir. I have been searching, for longer than you can imagine, for someone worthy to stand beside me." He paused, the weight of his next words hanging in the air like the first snowflake of winter. "I offer you sanctuary, Alara. I offer you and your daughter a place in my court, protection, resources, a life far removed from this suffering, and—" He took a breath, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his powerful frame. "I offer you the choice to be my mate, My Luna, my queen. The world stopped. The forest, the warriors, even the gentle breeze all seemed to hold their breath. Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. This could not be real. It was a fever dream brought on by too many cold nights and too little food. Why? She finally managed to choke out. Why me? Because you are the only one I have ever wanted, Theron said simply, and the raw honesty in his voice shattered something inside her. I am ancient, Ilara. I have known countless she-wolves. None of them have ever moved me. But you, the strength you possess, the love you have for your daughter, the refusal to break under impossible odds. You are my equal. You are my match. You are mine. He said the last word with a possessive intensity that should have frightened her, but instead, it sent a shiver down her spine that was not from the cold. And Lyra? She asked, her voice trembling, her hand instinctively tightening around her daughter. Lyra will be my daughter, Theron said, his voice firm and unwavering. She will be a princess of the Northern Territories. She will be raised with every advantage, every protection. She will be trained, not despite her differences, but because of them. She will be loved. And I swear to you, on my very life, that no one will ever call her weak again. Tears, hot and unbidden, streamed down Ilara's face. It was too much. Too much hope after so much despair. Too much light after so much darkness. I don't know you, she whispered. But you will, Theron said, a small, almost shy smile touching his lips. You will have all the time in the world to know me. There is no rush. The offer is yours to accept or refuse. But know this, Ilara of the Blackwood Pack. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his scent, pine, smoke, and something wild and ancient wrapping around her. I will wait. I have waited centuries. I can wait a little longer, but I will not stop protecting you. I will not stop ensuring your safety and Lyra's. Whether you choose to be my mate or not, you are under my protection now. You are mine to guard. He reached out, not to touch her this time, but to gently brush a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. The touch was electrifying, a jolt of warmth that spread through her entire body. Then he stepped back, his hand falling to his side. He turned to his warriors. Prepare a carriage, he commanded. We take the Lady Ilara and the Princess Lyra back to the keep. Ensure their comfort above all else. The warriors sprang into action, their earlier confusion replaced by determined efficiency. Ilara stood there, still clutching Lyra, her world irrevocably changed. She looked down at her daughter, at her bright silver eyes that seemed to see everything. What did she do? Accept the impossible offer of an Alpha King? Trust this powerful, ancient being who had watched over them? The alternative was to stay here, in this cabin, in this life of hardship and fear. She looked back up at Theron, who was watching her with patient, unwavering intensity. This is the moment that shifts Ilara's destiny forever. Smash that like button if you're rooting for her and Lyra. In his eyes, she saw not a threat, but a promise. A promise of safety, of a future, of a life where her daughter would not just survive, but thrive. She took a shaky breath. I will come, she said, her voice small but gaining strength. I will come with you. For Lyra. Theron's face transformed. The smile that broke across his features was like the sun breaking through storm clouds, radiant and warm. It softened the harsh lines of his face, making him look younger, less like an ancient king, and more like a man who had just received the greatest gift. For Lyra, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion, and perhaps, in time, for yourself. He extended his hand to her, a gesture of invitation, not command. Ilara, still holding her daughter with one arm, reached out with her other hand and placed it in his. His grip was warm, strong, and impossibly gentle. As his fingers closed around hers, she felt a jolt, a connection that went deeper than the physical. It was as if two parts of a long-separated whole had finally clicked back into place. The bond, the mate bond, dormant and denied for so long, suddenly flared to life. It was not the violent, overwhelming force she had felt with Kale, a bond built on passion and ambition. This was different. It was a quiet, steady warmth, a sense of rightness, of coming home. She gasped, her eyes widening, and she saw the same realization reflected in Theron's golden gaze. He had felt it too. He did not speak of it. Not yet, respecting her need for time and Weem's space, but the knowledge hung between them, a secret shared, a future promised. He gently guided her towards the waiting carriage, his hand never leaving hers. As she climbed inside, settling Lyra onto the plush cushions that were a far cry from the rough straw mattress she was used to, she looked back at the crumbling cabin. It had been her prison, her refuge, her battleground. It was a place of immense suffering, but also of immense strength. It was where she had learned the true meaning of resilience. But she was leaving it behind. She was stepping into a new world, a world of power and possibility, a world where her daughter would be a princess, and she would be a queen. As the carriage rolled forward, leaving the Blackwood Pack's territory behind, Alara leaned back against the soft cushions, Lyra sleeping peacefully in her arms. Through the window, she could see Theron riding beside the carriage, his gaze constantly flicking towards them, a silent guardian, a devoted protector. For the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to feel something she had almost forgotten: hope. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of love. The journey to the northern keep took several days, a passage through landscapes that grew progressively wilder and more breathtaking. They left behind the dense, suffocating forests of the Blackwood territory and entered a realm of towering mountains, vast open plains dotted with ancient stones, and forests where the trees grew to impossible heights, their branches thick with emerald moss that glowed faintly in the twilight. Alara watched it all with wide eyes. Lyra nestled against her, seemingly absorbing the changing world with the same quiet intensity. Theron rode alongside the carriage for much of the journey, sometimes at the head of his guard, issuing commands with the ease of a born leader, other times closer, his golden eyes often seeking hers through the window. He did not press her, did not demand her attention or affection. He was simply present, a constant, reassuring presence. In the evenings, when they stopped to make camp, he would personally ensure that she and Lyra had the warmest spot by the fire, the best of the provisions. He would sit a respectful distance away, but always within sight, a silent sentinel. She found herself watching him too, studying him. He was not what she had expected an Alpha King to be. There was power in him, yes, an almost terrifying amount of it, but there was also a deep well of patience and a surprising gentleness. He spoke to his warriors with respect, not cruelty. He listened when they spoke. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. On the third night, emboldened by his consistent kindness and the growing warmth of the bond she could no longer deny, she approached him as he sat by the fire, sharpening a long, wicked-looking blade. He looked up as she drew near, his eyes reflecting the firelight like molten gold. He set the blade aside immediately. "May I sit?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Always," he replied, a small smile touching his lips. He gestured to a spot on the log beside him, and she sat, careful to keep a small distance, Lyra asleep in her arms. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of night birds the only sounds. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you watch over me, all those months in the forest?" You left me food, firewood. You protected me. Why? Theron was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. I sensed you, he said, months before I ever saw you. I was traveling through the region, dealing with border disputes, and I felt a pull, a call. It was faint at first, easily dismissed as the wind or the forest's magic. But it persisted. It grew stronger. It led me to the edge of the Blackwood territory. And there, in that forgotten corner of the woods, I saw you. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You were gathering wood, your belly swollen with child, moving slowly, painfully. You were alone, and I felt rage. A rage unlike any I had known in centuries. Not at you, but at the injustice of it, at the cruelty, at the sheer stupidity of those who had cast you aside. He paused, his jaw clenching, and then I felt something else. I felt the bond. Faint, dormant, but there. You were mine, my mate, the one I had been searching for across centuries, and you had been rejected, cast aside like refuse, by a fool who could not see your worth? Are you hooked on this love story? Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of fate and second chance love. You could have revealed yourself, Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. You could have claimed me then. I could have, Theron agreed, but I would not. You were vulnerable, Alara. You were suffering. If I had appeared then, a stranger, an alpha king, demanding you be my mate, what would you have thought? You would have thought I was just another male seeking to use you, to claim you as a possession. You deserved better than that. You deserved the choice. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers, giving her the option to pull away. She didn't. He gently took her hand in his thumb tracing slow circles on her skin. So I watched. I ensured your survival. I provided what I could without revealing myself, without forcing your hand. I wanted you to know, when the time came, that I was not a threat. I was an ally, a protector. And when you were strong enough, when you had survived the impossible, then I would offer you the choice. The choice to come with me, to be my mate. Not out of desperation, but out of, I hoped, in time, out of love. Tears welled up in Alara's eyes again. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. Cale had spoken of destiny, of legacy, of power. Theron spoke of choice, of respect, of love. I don't know if I can love again, she admitted, her voice trembling. Cale, he broke something in me. I don't know if I can trust again. Theron's expression softened, and he squeezed her hand gently. I know, he said. And I am not Cale. I will spend every day proving that to you. Love is not something I demand, Alara. It is something I hope to earn. There is no rush. We have time. All the time in the world. He looked down at Lyra, sleeping peacefully in Alara's arms, her tiny silver hair catching the firelight. She is remarkable, you know, he said, his voice filled with awe. I have seen many pups in my long life, but none like her. She has a power within her, a latent magic that is old and rare. It is why your pack feared her. They sensed it, even if they did not understand it. They saw difference and assumed weakness. But they were wrong. He looked back up at Alara. She is not weak. She is destined to be one of the strongest of our kind. And you, who carried her, who protected her, who gave her life in defiance of everything, you are the reason she will thrive. You are her foundation. You are her strength. Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with the male sitting beside her, holding her hand, speaking words that mended the broken pieces of her heart, one careful stitch at a time. They sat together by the fire long into the night, talking quietly, sharing stories. Theron spoke of his long life, of the kingdoms he had seen rise and fall, of the loneliness that came with immortality, of the hope that had almost died within him until he felt her call. Alara spoke of her past, of her life in the Blackwood Pack, of her dreams before the rejection, of the fear and defiance that had sustained her through the darkest months, and slowly, tentatively, the foundation of something real, something lasting, began to form between them. Not the explosive, volatile bond she had known with Kale, but something deeper, steadier, built on mutual respect, understanding, and a growing, undeniable affection. When they finally retired for the night, Alara found herself sleeping more soundly than she had in months, Lyra warm against her chest, and the knowledge that Theron was watching over them, a guardian in the darkness, a promise of a brighter tomorrow. The Northern Keep was not a castle in the traditional sense. It was a fortress, carved into the side of a mountain, a seamless blend of ancient stone and living rock. Towers rose like the peaks of the mountains themselves, and banners bearing the crowned wolf sigil snapped in the crisp, cold wind. It was a place of power, of permanence, of a history that stretched back to the very dawn of their kind. As the carriage rolled through the massive gates, Alara felt a mix of awe and trepidation. This was to be her home. This was to be Lyra's home. The warriors who guarded the gates bowed deeply as Theron rode past, their eyes flicking with curiosity to the carriage that followed. Word had clearly spread. The Alpha King had returned, and he had brought guests. She was led to chambers that were far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The rooms were vast, warmed by roaring fireplaces, furnished with plush rugs, carved wooden furniture, and tapestries that depicted ancient battles and hunts. There was a nursery adjoining her bedroom, already stocked with a cradle, soft blankets, and toys carved from wood and bone. Lyra seemed to take to it immediately, her silver eyes wide with wonder as she looked around at the new, colorful world. Servants, kind-faced and efficient, helped Alara bathe, washing away the grime and weariness of months of hardship. They dressed her in soft, clean linens, then in a gown of deep forest green, simple but elegant, that made her feel, for the first time in a very long time, beautiful. When she looked at herself in the polished silver mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She was no longer the gaunt, desperate creature who had lived on scraps and fear. There was color in her cheeks, a light in her eyes. She looked alive. That evening, Theron requested her presence at dinner. It was not a command, but an invitation, and she accepted. She left Lyra in the care of a gentle, older woman named Marta, who had come highly recommended and who had cooed over the silver-haired pup with genuine delight. The dining hall was grand, a long table that could seat 50, though tonight it was set only for 2, at one end, close to the fire. Theron was already there, standing as she entered. He had changed from his travel leathers into a tunic of dark blue and black, simple but finely made, and his hair, usually tied back, was loose, falling to his shoulders. He looked less like a king and more like a man, and the sight of him made her heart skip a beat. "Ilara?" He greeted her, his voice warm. He pulled out a chair for her, a gesture of courtesy that surprised her. They ate, and the food was a revelation. Rich stews, roasted meats, fresh bread, fruits she had only heard of in stories. It was a feast after months of near starvation, and she found herself eating with an enthusiasm that might have embarrassed her if Theron had not been watching her with such open, pleased affection. "Eat," he encouraged. You need to regain your strength, both of you. They talked as they ate, the conversation flowing more easily now. He asked about Lyra, about her needs, about what Alara envisioned for her daughter's future. She spoke of wanting Lyra to be happy, to be safe, to have choices. He listened intently, nodding, occasionally asking clarifying questions. He was genuinely interested, not just in Lyra as a future heir, but in her as a person, a child. She will have the best tutors, he said, not just in combat and strategy, but in art, music, history, languages. She will be educated in all things, so she may choose her own path. And she will be trained in controlling her power, whatever form it takes. I have seers, wise women and men who understand the old magic. They will guide her. Alara felt a weight lift from her chest. This was what she had wanted, what she had dreamed of in her darkest moments. A future for Lyra, a real future. And what of me? She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. What is my role here, Theron? Am I to be a decoration? A vessel for future heirs? A trophy to prove you have a mate? She needed to know. She needed to hear it from him. Theron set down his goblet, his expression turning serious. He reached across the table and took her hand, his touch firm and grounding. You are to be my equal, Alara, he said, his voice intense. You are to be my Luna. That is not a title of ornamentation. It is a title of power. You will rule beside me. Your word will carry the weight of law. Your counsel will guide my decisions. You will be the heart of this kingdom, as I am its strength. I do not need a decoration. I do not need a vessel. I need a partner. I need you. He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. And in time, if you wish it, yes, perhaps there will be more children. But that is your choice, Alara. Always your choice. I will never force you. I will never demand. I am not Kale. The sincerity in his eyes, the raw honesty in his voice, shattered the last of her defenses. She felt the mate bond flare within her, no longer a tentative warmth, but a blazing fire. She felt the pull towards him, the undeniable connection. And for the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge it, to feel it without fear. I feel it, she whispered, her voice trembling. The bond. I feel it. Theron's eyes widened, and a look of pure, unfiltered joy crossed his face. I have felt it since the moment I first saw you, he admitted. I have been waiting, hoping you would feel it too. He stood, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. He stepped closer until they were only a breath apart. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. May I kiss you, Alara? He asked, his voice a low rumble. I will not take without asking. She looked up at him, at the ancient, powerful being who was looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She felt the bond singing between them, urging her closer. And she realized, with a clarity that was both startling and liberating, that she wanted this. She wanted him. Yes, she whispered. The kiss was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was not the rough, demanding kisses Kale had given her, born of passion and possessiveness. This was gentle, exploratory, a question and an answer all at once. His lips were soft against hers, warm and inviting. He kissed her as if he had all the time in the world, as if she were something fragile and precious that he was afraid of breaking. But as she leaned into him, her hands finding their way to his chest, the kiss deepened. The gentleness gave way to a growing heat, a hunger that was mutual and undeniable. The mate bond flared, a connection that was not just emotional, but physical, primal. It was the recognition of two souls meant to be intertwined, two halves of a whole finally reunited. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theron rested his forehead against hers. "You are mine," he whispered, the words of vow, "and I am yours, for as long as you will have me." "For as long as I live," Elara whispered back, and she meant it. The following months were a period of profound adjustment and unexpected joy. Elara learned what it meant to be a Luna. She attended council meetings, sitting beside Theron, listening to the disputes and concerns of the various pacts and territories under his rule. At first she was silent, overwhelmed by the politics and the sheer scale of his domain. But Theron encouraged her to speak, to offer her perspective. And slowly, she found her voice. Her insights, born from her own experiences of hardship and survival, proved invaluable. She understood the struggles of the common wolves, the fears and the hopes of those who lived on the margins. She became an advocate for the vulnerable, for the outcasts, for those who had been overlooked. And the people loved her for it. Lyra thrived. She grew rapidly, her silver hair growing longer, her silver eyes always bright with curiosity. She was adored by the entire keep. Theron doted on her, spending hours with her, reading to her, playing with her, carrying her on his shoulders through the vast halls. He was, in every way that mattered, her father. And she loved him. She called him Papa in her own baby babble, and the first time she did, Theron's eyes had welled up with tears, a sight that had melted Elara's heart completely. As Lyra grew, the signs of her unique power became more apparent. Objects would sometimes move on their own when she was nearby and upset. The air around her would shimmer faintly with a silver light. The wise women and seers confirmed what Theron had suspected. Lyra possessed a rare form of magic, an ancient gift that allowed her to sense and, to a degree, manipulate the emotions and energies around her. It was a power that could be used for great good or great harm, and it needed to be carefully nurtured and controlled. Theron spared no expense in finding the best mentors for her. Not to suppress her power, but to teach her how to understand it, how to wield it with responsibility and compassion. Lyra, despite her young age, took to the training with an earnestness that was both endearing and awe-inspiring. She was, as Theron had predicted, destined for greatness. Elara and Theron's bond deepened with each passing day. The initial spark of the mate bond blossomed into a profound, abiding love. They were partners in every sense of the word, ruling together, supporting each other, finding solace and strength in one another. The physical aspect of their relationship was a revelation to Elara. Kel had been a selfish lover, focused on his own pleasure. Theron was the opposite. He was attentive, patient, passionate. He worshipped her body with a reverence that made her feel cherished and desired in a way she had never known. Their nights together were filled with a heat that left them both breathless and sated, the mate bond amplifying every touch, every kiss, every whispered word of love. She conceived again, a little over a year after arriving at the keep. This pregnancy was different. There was no fear, no rejection, no prophecy of doom. There was only joy. Theron was ecstatic, hovering over her with a protectiveness that was both endearing and occasionally exasperating. He made sure she wanted for nothing, that she rested, that she was happy. Lyra was excited to become a big sister. She would talk to Elara's growing belly, telling the baby stories and singing songs in her sweet, childish voice. The birth was easier this time, attended by skilled midwives and healers, with Theron by her side, holding her hand, his strength and love a constant anchor. They had a son, a strong, healthy boy with Theron's golden eyes and Elara's dark hair. They named him Kale, not after her former mate, but because the name meant warrior in the old tongue, and they wanted their son to embody the strength and courage that both his parents possessed. This is what true love and redemption look like. Drop a comment with your favorite moment from Alara's journey so far. Life was full. It was happy. But peace, as Alara had learned, was often a fragile thing. The past has a way of clawing its way back, and shadows are never truly banished, only held at bay. It came without warning, a violation of the sanctuary she had built. Kyle, her former mate, the one who had rejected her and set her on this path, arrived at the gates of the northern keep. He did not come alone. He came with a small contingent of warriors from the Blackwood pack, and he came with a demand. He wanted Lyra. The news reached Alara as she was in the nursery, playing with Lyra and little Kale. A servant, white-faced and trembling, brought the message. Kale was at the gates, demanding an audience with the Alpha King, claiming rights over the child he had once denounced as a curse. Alara's blood ran cold. Every protective instinct roared to life. She scooped Lyra into her arms, holding her tight, her heart pounding with a primal fear she thought she had left behind. Theron arrived moments later, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He had already been informed. He looked at Alara, at the terror in her eyes, at the way she clutched Lyra, and his own rage intensified. "He will not touch her," Theron said, his voice a low, deadly promise. "He will not even breathe the same air as her. I swear it on my life." He turned to his guards. "Bring him to the throne room, but keep him contained, and summon the council. This ends now." The throne room was a vast, echoing chamber, cold and austere, designed to intimidate. Theron sat upon his throne, a massive seat carved from dark stone, his presence radiating power and authority. Alara stood beside him, not behind, her own spine straight, her chin held high. She was no longer the broken, rejected she-wolf. She was the Luna of the Northern Territories, and she would face Kale as such. Kale was brought in, flanked by guards. He looked older, harder. The years had not been kind. His eyes, once filled with ambition and arrogance, now held a manic desperation. He looked at Alara, and for a moment something flickered in his gaze. Regret? Longing? But it was quickly replaced by a calculating coldness. "Alpha King," Kyle said, bowing stiffly. His gaze flicked to Alara, and he did not bow to her. "I come to claim what is rightfully mine. The pup, Lyra. She is my daughter, blood of my blood." "She is no such thing." Theron's voice was like thunder, echoing through the chamber. "You rejected her. You rejected her mother. You cast them aside to die. You have no claim." Kale's jaw clenched. "I was mistaken," he said, the words clearly tasting like ash in his mouth. "The seers were wrong. I see that now. The girl has power. She is valuable. She belongs with her bloodfather, with her rightful pack. She belongs where she is loved," Alara spoke, her voice ringing clear and strong. Kale's eyes snapped to her, and she met his gaze unflinchingly. "You called her a curse, Kale. You called me a vessel. You threw us away. You have no right to her now." "I have every right," Kale snarled, his composure cracking. "She is mine by blood. The law—" "The law," Theron interrupted, his voice cold as ice, "recognizes the bond of a father who raises a child, who loves a child, who protects a child. I am Lyra's father in every way that matters. You are a stranger who shares some blood. That is all." He stood, descending from the throne, his sheer size and power dwarfing Kyle. "You rejected her when she was vulnerable. You wished her dead. Now that she is thriving, now that she is powerful, you come crawling back, seeking to claim her as a prize. You disgust me." Kale's face twisted with rage. "You have stolen what is mine, my mate, my child, my legacy. She was never your mate after you rejected her. Theron said, his voice laced with contempt. The bond was broken by your own words, and Lyra was never your legacy. She is her own person, and she will forge her own path, a path far greater than anything you could have ever envisioned for her. He leaned in close, his golden eyes burning into Kale's. You made your choice, Kale of the Blackwood Pack. You chose pride and superstition over love and loyalty. Now you must live with the consequences. Lyra will never be yours. Ilara will never be yours. Leave this place and do not return. If you do, I will not be so merciful. Kale looked from Theron to Ilara, and he saw it. He saw the bond between them, the unbreakable connection, the love that radiated from them. He saw that he had lost, not just Lyra, but everything. He had gambled and lost it all. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He turned to leave, but then he paused, looking back at Ilara one last time. I was a fool, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I see that now. I threw away a treasure. Yes, you did, Ilara said, her voice firm but not unkind. But your biggest mistake was not seeing it until it was too late. Goodbye, Kale. He left, escorted by the guards, and Ilara felt a chapter of her life, finally, irrevocably close. The ghost of her past had been confronted and banished. She was free. Theron pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Are you all right? He murmured against her hair. I am, she said, and she meant it. I am home. But the encounter with Kyle had stirred something darker. He had not come alone, and his desperation had been palpable. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and such men were dangerous. Theron, ever vigilant, ordered increased security around the keep, particularly around Ilara and the children. He did not trust that Kale would simply slink away into the night. His instincts proved correct. A week later, on the night of the winter solstice, when the moon was at its fullest and the keep was celebrating, the attack came. It was not Kale who led it, but a band of rogues, desperate and vicious, hired by gold that Kale had somehow scraped together. They infiltrated the keep during the festivities, taking advantage of the distraction. Their target was clear: the royal nursery. Ilara had put the children to bed herself that night, kissing Lyra and little Kyle goodnight, whispering promises of stories and lullabies for the next day. She had left Marta watching over them, a trusted guardian. She and Theron were in the great hall, among their people, when the alarm bells rang. The joyful music cut off abruptly, replaced by the sounds of clashing steel and shouted warnings. Theron's head snapped up, his wolf senses immediately alert. He looked at Ilara, and she saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. The children. They ran. Theron shifted mid-stride, his massive black wolf form tearing through the corridors with terrifying speed. Ilara, driven by a mother's primal terror, ran as fast as her legs could carry her, her heart pounding in her chest. They reached the nursery to find chaos. The door was splintered, hanging from its hinges. Marta lay unconscious on the floor, a trickle of blood on her temple. And in the center of the room, a rogue wolf, a scarred, vicious creature, held a struggling, terrified Lyra by the scruff of her neck. Little Kale was screaming in his cradle. Theron's roar was a sound that shook the very walls. He launched himself at the rogue, a blur of black fur and lethal intent. The fight was brief and brutal. Theron was a king, an ancient warrior, and his rage was a force of nature. He tore the rogue apart not quickly, but with a savage precision that left no doubt about the fate of those who threatened his family. The rogue dropped Lyra as Theron attacked, and Ilara, ignoring the carnage, rushed to her daughter. Lyra was terrified, shaking, but unhurt. Ilara scooped her up, holding her close, murmuring soothing words. She rushed to little Kale, picking him up as well, cradling both her children, her body a shield. But the attack was not over. More rogues poured into the corridor, drawn by the sounds of battle. They were outnumbered, surrounded. Theron, still in his wolf form, placed himself between the rogues and his family, snarling a warning. The rogues hesitated, seeing the Alpha King in his full, terrifying glory. But they were desperate, driven by gold and the promise of a prize. They attacked. Theron fought like a demon, his claws and fangs tearing through flesh and bone. But there were too many. Alara, still holding her children, felt a cold dread seep into her bones. They were going to be overwhelmed. Then, something extraordinary happened. Lyra, still in Alara's arms, began to glow. A soft, silver light emanated from her small body, growing brighter with each passing second. Her silver eyes, wide with fear moments before, were now blazing with an otherworldly power. She reached out a tiny hand towards the attacking rogues, and the light pulsed. The rogues stopped mid-attack, frozen in place. Their snarls died on their lips. Their eyes, filled with malice and bloodlust, suddenly filled with something else. Tears. They began to weep. Great racking sobs that shook their bodies. They dropped their weapons, clutching at their chests, their faces contorted in anguish. The silver light from Lyra was not a weapon. It was something far more powerful. It was empathy. It was the weight of their own guilt, their own pain, their own lost innocence, reflected back at them with such intensity that they could not bear it. They saw the faces of those they had hurt, the loved ones they had betrayed, the choices that had led them down this dark path. And they broke. One by one they collapsed to their knees weeping, no longer a threat, but broken men confronting the reality of their own souls. Theron, panting, his black fur matted with blood, shifted back to his human form. He stared at Lyra, his golden eyes wide with awe and a touch of fear. Not fear of her, but fear of the immense power she wielded. Alara looked down at her daughter. The silver light faded and Lyra slumped against her, exhausted. She had used her power instinctively to protect her family, and it had been devastating in its effectiveness. The guards arrived moments later, securing the weeping rogues, checking on the royal family. Marta was tended to. Her injuries, thankfully not severe. The threat was neutralized, but the night had been irrevocably marked by violence and the revelation of Lyra's true power. In the aftermath, as Theron held Alara and both children close, the weight of what had happened settled over them. Lyra's power was not just a gift. It was a responsibility, a burden. And it was clear that the world would not leave them in peace. There would always be those who sought to use her, to control her, to exploit her abilities. "We will protect her," Theron vowed, his voice hoarse. "We will teach her. We will guide her. She will not be a weapon. She will be a force for good." Alara nodded, her own resolve hardening. Lyra would not be defined by fear or by the greed of others. She would be defined by love, by compassion, by the strength of her family. The next morning, as the keep began to recover from the attack, Cale was found. He had been hiding in a nearby village, waiting for news of the rogues' success. When he learned of their failure, and more importantly, of Lyra's display of power, he was brought before Theron once more. But this time, he was not a supplicant or a claimant. He was a prisoner, charged with conspiracy and attempted kidnapping. He stood in the throne room, shackled, his face a mask of defeat. The manic desperation was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Theron looked down at him with cold contempt. "You hired those rogues. You sent them to take my daughter." "She was supposed to be mine," Cale said, his voice flat. "She was supposed to be weak. She was supposed to be nothing. But you made her powerful. You stole my destiny." "Your destiny," Theron said, his voice dripping with scorn, "was to be a mediocre beta, blinded by ambition and superstition. You threw away a miracle because it did not fit your narrow vision. You have no one to blame but yourself." He looked at Alara, who stood beside him, her face impassive. What should his punishment be, my Luna? He has threatened our family, endangered our children. What does justice demand? Ilara looked at Kale. She felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, not even pity. He was a stranger, a ghost from a past that no longer had any power over her. But his actions had put her children at risk, and for that, there had to be consequences. He should live with his failure, she said, her voice calm and measured. Banish him to the farthest reaches of your territory, to a place where he can do no harm. Let him live out his days knowing that he had everything and threw it away for nothing. Let him live with the knowledge that the weak pup he rejected is more powerful and loved than he will ever be. That is a punishment far worse than death. Theron nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. So be it. Kale was dragged away, his empty protests fading into silence. The threat was ended. The past was finally, truly buried. The winter solstice gave way to spring, and with the melting snow came a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Lyra's power was no longer a secret, and the wise women and seers worked tirelessly to help her understand and control it. She learned not to use it as a weapon, but as a tool for healing, for understanding, for bridging divides. She was, as Theron had foreseen, destined to be a great leader, not through brute force, but through empathy and wisdom. Ilara and Theron ruled with fairness and compassion, their love for each other and their family a beacon of stability in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. They had more children, each one loved and cherished, each one adding to the strength and joy of their family. But it was Lyra who remained special, the silver-eyed girl who had defied prophecy, who had been called weak and had proven to be stronger than anyone could have imagined. She grew into a young woman of remarkable grace and power, beloved by her people, respected by her peers, and adored by her family. Years later, when Alara was older, her dark hair streaked with silver, and Theron's face, though still handsome, bore the lines of a long and eventful life. They would often sit together on the balcony of their chambers, looking out over the kingdom they had built together. Lyra, now a young woman, would sometimes join them, bringing her younger siblings, who were boisterous and full of life. And Alara would think back to that cold, desperate night in the crumbling cabin at the edge of the Blackwood Pack's territory. She would remember the fear, the loneliness, the certainty that she and her child were doomed, and she would marvel at the impossible journey that had brought her here, to this place of peace and love and belonging. She would look at Theron, her mate, her king, her love, and she would see the golden eyes that had watched over her in the darkness, the steadfast presence that had given her hope when she had none. And she would look at Lyra, her firstborn, her miracle, the child who had been prophesied to be weak, but who had become a warrior in the truest sense of the word. Not a warrior of violence, but a warrior of the heart. Your mate said your pup would be weak, Theron would murmur, echoing his words from so long ago, a reminder of how far they had come. But I knew better. Alara would smile, leaning against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. You did, she would agree. You always did. And in the quiet peace of their shared life, surrounded by the family they had built and the kingdom they had nurtured, they knew that they had defied every prophecy, overcome every obstacle, and found a love that was stronger than fate itself. The prophecy had been wrong, the rejection had been a blessing in disguise, and the pup who was supposed to be weak had become the strongest of them all. Not because of brute force, but because of love, compassion, and the unwavering belief of those who had refused to give up on her. Alara's journey, from rejected outcast to beloved Luna, was a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of a mother's love, and the transformative magic of a bond that was truly meant to be. and as the sun set over the northern territories, casting the snow-covered peaks in hues of gold and rose, Alara knew, with a certainty that resonated in the very marrow of her bones, that she was finally, irrevocably, home, and that she was loved beyond measure. Kale, abandoned by his followers who were now lost in the depths of their own resurrected grief, stood alone. His madness, stripped of the validation of his army, turned inward. He saw Alara, not as the weak vessel he had cast aside, but as a woman radiating a power he could never comprehend. He saw Lyra not as a runt, but as a being whose strength was so far beyond his own that he could not even measure it. His entire worldview, built on the simple foundation of physical might, had crumbled into dust. He let out a wordless cry of despair and lunged one last time, not with any hope of victory, but in a final, nihilistic act of destruction. Before he could take 2 steps, a shadow fell over him. Theron stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. The battle at the pass was won, and he had felt the surge of Alara's and Lyra's power, a call that had drawn him here with terrifying speed. He did not speak. He did not need to. He simply raised a hand, and Kale was lifted from his feet, held suspended in the air by an invisible force, choking and gasping. "You have threatened my family for the last time." Theron's voice was lethally quiet. He made a fist, and Kale's body contorted, a silent scream on his lips. But Alara stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Theron's arm. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Don't kill him. Not like this. His punishment is to live with what he is, to live with his weakness." Theron looked at her, his rage warring with his love for her. He saw the strength in her eyes, the compassion that had not been burned away by all she had suffered. He nodded slowly. With a flick of his wrist, he threw Kale from the room, sending him crashing down the corridor, broken but alive. "Guards," Theron commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "Take him. Banish him to the withered lands. Let him live out his days alone, with nothing but his own bitterness for company." The guards dragged Kale away, his empty threats and curses echoing down the hall until they faded into nothing. The immediate threat was gone. Theron rushed to Alara, his hands framing her face, his golden eyes scanning her for any injury. "Are you hurt? Is Lyra—" "We are safe," Alara assured him, her voice trembling slightly with the aftermath of the confrontation. "We are safe." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, burying his face in her hair. He was the Alpha King, a being of immense power. But in that moment, he was just a male, terrified of what he had almost lost. He then knelt before Lyra, who stood watching them, her silver eyes calm once more. He took her small hands in his. "What you did," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You did not destroy them. You reminded them of who they were. That is a power greater than any I possess. You are truly your mother's daughter." Lyra smiled, a small, shy smile. "I protected Mama." "Yes, you did," Theron said, his voice thick with pride. "You are my brave little warrior." Later that night, after the keep was secured and the last of the rogues had either surrendered or fled, Theron and Alara stood on their balcony. The winter solstice moon was high in the sky, huge and impossibly bright, casting a silver sheen over the snow-covered forest. The world was silent, peaceful. Lyra was asleep in her bed, her breathing soft and even, the faint silver glow of her eyes gone for now. Theron wrapped his arms around Alara from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood together, watching the moonlight on the snow, 2 souls who had found each other in the darkness. "Your mate said your pup would be weak," he murmured, his voice a reverent rumble against her ear, the words a callback to a lifetime ago. "I said she would be a warrior." He paused, and she could feel the smile in his voice. We were both wrong. Alara turned in his arms to look up at him, a question in her eyes. His expression was one of absolute adoration, the love he felt for her shining from his golden eyes, a light as powerful as the moon above them. She is not just a warrior, he explained, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. She is a queen, a leader who will rule with a strength of heart that will change the world. He looked from her eyes to the peaceful kingdom spread below them, then back again. And you, he whispered, his voice filled with a love that spanned centuries. My beautiful, courageous mate. You are the empress who forged her. She leaned up and kissed him, a kiss filled with gratitude, with peace, with the profound certainty of a love that had healed every wound and righted every wrong. She was not a vessel, not a blight, not an outcast. She was a Luna, a mother, an empress. She was loved. And in the silent, silvered light of the winter moon, surrounded by the strength of her family and the peace of her kingdom, she was finally, completely home.